Well, thank you ever so much for giving me this opportunity and to talk about a very important issue, which is aging and long-term care in the Middle East and North Africa. And I want to speak about both opportunities and challenges, because sometimes when we approach the topic of aging, many speakers will approach it from a crisis point of view, and there is some challenges, of course, but also there are opportunities to bear in mind when we speak about these issues. So just this is a disclosure statement. So I have no financial relationship with the organizers, and my learning objectives are in the sheet. So basically, we want to have a little bit of understanding of population aging in the region, and thinking about well-being and healthy aging, and also think about opportunities and challenges, and focusing on some policy and practice issues. So just introductions. There is a cultural context in the Middle East and North Africa when it comes to older people. There is always, when we speak about older people, is treasuring older people. They are very important to the society. And we fondly speak about our parents and grandparents. However, there is kind of what's real in terms of what are the opportunities that are available for older people and what are the kind of rhetoric values. And we need to think about reconstructing this. So it's not enough to say we treasure older people, we value them, but it's more important to offer people at all ages, and particularly at older ages, opportunities to participate and have a meaningful life. So both health and meaningful aging. And health, it doesn't mean that if somebody have a medical condition, then they don't have a healthy aging. It's really about what you do with your life, and how you enjoy your life and participate and be recognized despite any health issues. And the other point that I want to highlight here in the region, and similar to a lot of countries in the Southern European countries, for example, care is a very much family business. So we care for each other. We provide for our children and for our parents, and it's really kept within the family. But there are also issues around careability and care burden that we want to touch upon. One of the issues with the region, which is different from perhaps the historical and current changes in Europe and more developed countries in terms of demographic transitions, that we still have the youth bulk, and we have very large younger populations, which is really a window of opportunities. We call it dividends, but it also means that younger population dominate the policy discourse and agenda. We also have, as Dr. Soraya have kindly said, we have a epidemiological transition with quite a lot of comorbidity, particularly around obesity and diabetes, and maybe a culture that does not encourage physical activity. And we will touch upon isolation and loneliness. But we need to consider and realize that there are variations within and between countries. So the MENA region brings in a diversity of countries, not only in terms of income. So I just put here income level and palliative care as an indicator of attention to long-term care needs. But there are a variety of differences related to the population size, the geography, etc. What countries belong to which groups, and we have, of course, high income, upper middle income, and up to low income. And when we look at palliative care, for example, maybe those who have more kind of advanced care provision, like generalized provision, does not really necessarily match the income. So it's not a direct relationship between income. It's also the efforts of the community and charitable organization in this part. So let's have a quick look at the population aging in the region. So when we think about population aging, what is population aging? Of course, throughout the history, and including in the region, some people lived for longer. Some people reach their 90s and their 80s, and maybe few reach it hundreds. But when we talk about population aging, we think about the whole structure of the population. So how the structure changes, including the proportion of older people from the whole and proportion of younger people. And there are various measurements we use as demographers, whether it's the age index or age dependency ratio, or percentage over 65 or 60. And they all revolve around perhaps a static thinking of productivity and retirement. So we think about, for example, age dependency ratio, clearly think about the younger and the older as economically dependent, and the middle age groups, say between 20 and 60 or 65, these are productive, economically productive bodies. So it's still kind of this static life course structured in a certain way. There are more efforts recently around trying to develop more dynamic measures, which look at perhaps prospective aging. So how much remaining life expectancy one can have, and on average in a country, and also how much healthy life expectancy one can have, and differentiation around that. This has not yet been used in the main kind of mainstream, but this is something to recognize that we cannot go on thinking about age in a very static way. And there's also whole the societal population level. And when we have this structure of thinking around the life course, it's difficult to have a paradigm shift. So it's not impossible, but it's more challenging to rethink the duties of people across the life course. So what's happening after retirement, and what's happening if people who didn't work, for example, reached a certain age. And also that reflects, so these are kind of societal changes actually internalized by people in themselves, by individual, and they would think, my perception of aging, what I can and what I cannot do. Is it acceptable for someone in my age to do this? And the expectations from me at a certain age, maybe now I have to look after my grandchildren, but what are the opportunities? So it's really thinking about the whole society and a whole kind of more life course thinking. And of course, an experience of a person with better health at age 60 or 70 will be different from another one. And it's not random, it's a cumulative of what has been happening across the life course. So what's common about, this is a part of the Middle East, of course, this is not the whole MENA region, but this is part of it in this map. What's really unique about the experience of population aging, it is the fast and rapid process of change. So we have been through what we call demographic transitions, lowering fertility rates, lowering mortality rates, and increased life expectancy, both at birth and also at age 60. So people who reach 60 still have longer to live. It doesn't mean we have longer to live healthy, but this is happening at a very faster rate. And what does this mean? That we're going to move and shift in these demographics and become population aging and aged populations much faster. And when I say faster, I'll show you some graphs. But this is also not happening in isolation. There is a lot of socio-political, economic changes in the structures. So we're nested, these population issues is nested within a broader socio-political and socio-economic differentiations, which brings economics opportunities, social and economic opportunity, but also brings a lot of challenges. So when I talk about faster, so these are historical changes in some of the more developed countries and maybe some middle kind of income countries. But if you look at France, for example, France started its aging transition in 1850, but it actually finished it somewhere in the 1995. So we're talking about over 100 years of slow changes. If I add here a few countries like Lebanon started in 2014. And when we say started, that a certain percentage of its population became older people. And again, we can argue what older means. We can debate that forever, but this is just a cutoff point. And they will reach another percentage, which is really an important cutoff of 20%, very recent, very, very soon, so 2030. So when you think about in policy terms, these mind-boggling data, like we only got 15 years to develop policy, to develop infrastructure, to change perception, to try to think about the well-being and health and opportunities of older people. We need to move really, really fast compared to the UK, Sweden, France, the US. So that's quite a toll. And the world is changing as well, because the majority of older people will be living in low and middle income countries, and part of that will be in the Middle East, of course. Here are another set of countries showing a different measure. Now here looking at 65 or more, between 7 and 14%. And what I want to show you, these are all Arab countries: Tunisia, Morocco, Iran, well, very close, Yemen, Saudi, Egypt, Palestine. And I want you to see, for example, Saudi, the line. Saudi is going to have 10 years to move from an aging population to aged population. They haven't started yet, but they're going to start soon. Some countries will have a slower, a less steep line, like Egypt. It's going to take longer. It's going to take 40 years. And that means that some countries will start later, but finish earlier. And also in other kind of terms of unemployment, female unemployment, and the relation between female and male labor markets. And I'm bringing in gender here because the care is really, a lot of it is female given. We find that really it's not a straight line relationship when it comes to aging. And I'll bring that later on, but to give you an idea of the differences that we are observing in the region. So let's talk about the well-being and healthy aging. So older people is not just a number. It's not, I've reached that age, that's it. It's a meaning of aging. And again, I touch upon that very, very quickly. There is no typical definitions. We use things that maybe makes our calculations easier because it link it to retirement age or whatever. But it varies, of course, within and across societies. And it carries with it desired but unwanted outcomes. And in some arenas, when we talk about growing older, there are some contradictions with that. When we talk about an older person, maybe one think of frailty, but also one thinks about maturity and independence or dependence. There are some societies that are very age conscious. And I think in the Middle East, this is maybe one of the societies. We think about older people as wisdom, as people who can bring expertise, but also as people who might not be able to do certain activities. But there is more in terms of the international arena in kind of attention to lifelong learning, thinking about really need to renew our thinking, particularly around digital technology, about learning new things, and about the broader holistic meaning of well-being that goes beyond just physical health. But of course, physical health is really important and is so linked to our well-being. And there are huge observed levels of inequalities at old age. Let's have a quick look about what's life expectancy and healthy life expectancy. So we've been seeing it's a great success story. Longevity is a great success story. We are gaining years in our lives. But the problem is that not all our years gained are healthy years. And there is a big difference between the experience in the Middle East and the experience, for example, in Europe. So it's still quite shocking in some countries in Europe, for example, in France, female life expectancy, it's 85 years, over 85 years at birth. But the healthy life expectancy is only 73 years. So that's a big number. That's 12 years lived in unhealthy years. And if you look, for example, similarly in Egypt, female, it's 74 years and the healthy life expectancy is 63 years. So similar kind of gaps. And within that, there are hidden issues as well in terms of ethnicity, socioeconomic differentials, wealth, whether a person is in employment or not. So that means that, yes, it's a success story, but we have to think about the needs of older people when they grow older and the differentiation between these needs according to certain characteristics. They will need more care, not just acute care like medical care, but social care and long-term care. So in terms of the health and epidemiology in the region, we have very high prevalence of chronic disease among older persons, particularly in the Gulf corporate countries. The prevalence of type 2 diabetes and obesity is unusually high relative to the rest of the world. We have a high percentage of older persons suffering from at least one chronic disease, and it ranges from 13% to 64%, for example, in Lebanon. And dementia is an Alzheimer, of course, you're going to hear about that, is a growing concern when it comes to older people. Obviously, some people can get young onset of dementia, and it's not a natural happening that when we all go old, we have to have dementia or Alzheimer, but the prevalence increase. And we know that the prevalence that we have at the moment for the regions are likely to be underestimated. Even if we use these underestimates, we are talking about millions of people who will be living with that condition. So let's look at the relationship between gender and kind of aging. We did mention quickly that the majority of care for older people in the region currently shouldered by the family and currently shouldered by women in the family. I looked at the Gender Inequality Index, and it's an index to show the disparities between females and males. And the higher the index, actually the higher the disparities, which means that it's not good. And what I plotted here is just the female labor participation rate as one element, as one indicator, and the proportion of population age 60 or more. And when we look here, for example, we find that the range of this Gender Inequality Index ranges from 2.1% to 73.3%, which is quite high in some countries. I summed it up as low, medium, and high. And for example, I'll show you here that, for example, there are relatively young population at the moment. As I said, that's not going to stay for long. Very soon in 2030s, they will start to be, go through the aging transition. And some countries, they have low proportion of older people, but high female labor participation. And for example, other country, Egypt always present as a scenario of quite high gender inequality, low female labor participation, and relatively high percentage of older people, which means that there is a lot of competing demands on women. So let's talk quickly about inequalities at old age. So part of the inequality is recognizing. So the first step is to recognize the people and recognize self-recognition, cultural visibility, and class, and then the assumption that we make if we see someone older. What do we expect that person to do? And representation or misrepresentation. So the media, how the media represent older people. Are we including them or excluding them from the environment? Is the environment by default, the infrastructure excludes certain people? Is the job market open? If an older person wanted to learn an activity, is that possible? So the participation comes in. And that means that through the life course, people gain social capital, gains knowledge. And through these kind of recognition and misrepresentation, you have negative and positive ideas that kind of shape the person's well-being at old age. So when we think about opportunities, when we think about older people, the notion now that people should age in place, that's best for themselves, they maintain independence, and they continue contribution within the society. And comes with the idea of long life learning at later life, economic participation, recognition. Financial well-being is a big issue, particularly in our society. It's a social protection measure, and moving from just safety nets to kind of strong pensions, but also one would think, what if people were not working during their lifetime, the gender differences, particularly linked to employment and pensions. But then comes here the long-term care, which is beyond personal and medical care. It's not hospital care, it's support for older people to do all these things, to live their life into the full. And of course, we can't ignore COVID-19 and what happened with COVID-19. One of the big things is social norms and isolation. And I just say one word or a few words about gender and potential isolation and loneliness at later life. We know that women live longer than men, but also within the region, the interspousal age gaps, particularly in the older generation, the cohorts now coming into the old age, maybe the age gap is high. We also know norms around remarriage after divorce and widowhood. So we find a higher prevalence of older women living alone. And we know that migration happening, proximity of living is not as close as before. So there is a high prevalence of being isolated at old age, and particularly if the activities and participation is not open equally to both genders. So let's look quickly about the what I call long-term care ecosystems, because it's not just services, it's a whole ecosystem.
5 minutes left, Shereen.
Thank you. And one part of that is the universal health coverage. And we know that this remains aspiration. There is a lot of policy development. Long-term care remains in the blind spot of the policy. There still remains reliance on the family. The environment and infrastructure, I can speak volumes here about how inclusive or excluding the environment can be. However, on the positive side, we have seen some recent national and regional and policy kind of attention, like there is the whole Arab aging strategy. We are seeing countries in the wake of the MIPA review, and we have the population dividends and the labor supply. We need to think about that. So just move on. I'm not going to talk about these graphs because it doesn't have much time. So we will talk about intergenerational support quickly, and the fact that we live now in multi-generation families. However, there are a lot of challenges into intergenerational support. The changes to the core kind of kin social structure, the migration, globalization, and the virtual intergenerational relation, and also the real meaning of connectivity. So you might be living in the same house with other generations, but you're really not connecting very well with the younger ones. And women has become more and more the sandwich generation, where they kind of care for their older people and care for their children. Just a few words on COVID. COVID, of course, have changed all our lives, and there has been a lot of attention to COVID. But older people, you know, while they had the attention in Europe in terms of they were hit the most death happened among older people, and in care home particularly. Older people in the discussion of COVID in the MENA region has been almost entirely absent, although they have actually suffered the most in terms of the isolation. This is a study we conducted through the Minara network, and I'm just going to tell you a few things. So we basically put together, developed some physical exercises program, and we did some phone interviews with older people during the pandemic. This happened earlier this year, around May, June. And we talked to people. Of course, it's not a generalized sample, but we found one constant thing, that when COVID came and the fear of infection, the most shielded and isolated group was the older people. And that had huge detrimental impact on their physical health. The deconditioning, the cognitive, both cognitive and physical health deteriorated considerably. So let's look to the policy opportunities. There is an interest, there is a growing interest. We have the UN Decade of Healthy Aging. There is an interest in low and middle income countries, including the MENA region, but there are fiscal constraints, there are competing policy priorities, and there are the awareness and the stigma, particularly when it comes to issues like dementia or cognitive ability. I have put together a new initiative to bring stakeholders together, which aligns with the broader international sustainable development goals. So it is really a very timely opportunity junction of time to talk about that, because historically the region has committed to social welfare, but it was mainly linked to employment. So we need to shift that more and to recognize the role of charitable and religious institutions in this. So this is the initiatives. I would really encourage people to go and visit it. It's seminara.org. There are a lot of information, raising awareness to connect different actors. And we produce some practical online tools and some videos to be used to bring the voices of older people and their informal carers. And we did some kind of work with people. So in conclusion, the success factors for sustainable aging policies is really to think about human rights and equality at old age, think about the aging in place and enabling environment. We need to recognize that there remains many challenges, particularly in terms of the reliance on the family, how women could manage their competing demands. So it's a dynamic context, a diverse and an equal experience. There is policy challenges, fiscal consequences, and a changing landscape around COVID and mobility. And I'll stop here to take questions and discussions. Thank you so much.